Good afternoon. I would have read this in the morning if I didn't get carried away with other stuff. It was the plan, but, well, we get carried away doing other stuff. It's just not easy to do that. Actually, I would have read it last night, but I was too tired. I'm tired right now. I just woke up from a nap because my eyes were hurting me. I don't know what to do. Okay. So, Chapter 8. By the time I finished 8th grade, Mom had been sober for at least a year. I left my water in the other room. At least I can breathe. Yeah, got that. And she'd been dating Matt for 2 or 3 years. I was doing well in school, and Mama had taken a couple vacations. One trip to California to visit Uncle Jimmy, and another to Las Vegas with her friend Kathy. Lindsay married soon after Papa's death. I loved her husband, Kevin, and still do, for a simple reason. He never mistreated her. That's all I ever wanted in a mate for my sister. Just under a year at their wedding, just under a year after their wedding, Lindsay gave birth to her son, Cameron. She was a mom, and a damn good one at that. I was proud of her. And I adored my new nephew. And we also had 2 children, which gave me 3 little kids dote on. Um, I saw, I saw all of this as a sign of family renewal. Not, I don't know how to read this. And I'm not gonna stop now. I done started again. I don't want to stop again. I forget it's my necklace. Alright. That summer before high school, and thus a hopeful one. The summer before high school, and was thus a hopeful one. That same summer, however, Mom announced that I'd be moving in with Matt in his Dayton home. I loved I liked Matt, and by then Mom had lived in Dayton with him for a little while, but Dayton was a 45-minute drive from Mama's, and Mom made it clear that she wanted me to attend school in Dayton. Um, I liked my life in Middletown. I wanted to attend the high school. I wanted to attend the high school. I loved my friends, and although it was a bit unconventional, I enjoyed splitting time between Mom's and Mama's houses during the week and hanging out with Dad on the weekends. Importantly, I could always go to Mama's house if I needed to, and that made all the difference. Let me put on my chapstick. Hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, I remembered life when I didn't have that safety valve. I didn't want to go back to those days. Moreover, any move would be without Lindsay and Cameron. So when Mom made her announcement about moving in with Matt, I belted out, "Absolutely not," and stormed away. Um, Mom drew from this conversation that I had anger problems and scheduled a time to meet with her therapist. Really? I didn't want. I didn't know she had a therapist or the money to afford one, but I agreed to meet with this lady. Uh, where are we? First meeting took place the following week in a musty old office near Dayton, where a nondescript middle-aged woman, Mom, and I tried to understand why I was so angry. I recognized that human beings aren't very good at judging themselves. I had been the I had I may have been wrong that I was no angrier, in fact considerably less so than most of the people in my life. Maybe Mom was right and I did have um some anger problems. I tried to keep an open mind. If nothing else, I thought this woman might give Mom and me an opportunity to get everything in the open. But that first session felt like an ambush. Immediately, the woman began asking why I would scream at my mother and storm off. I didn't recognize that she was my mother uh, and that I had to live with her by law. The therapist chronicled I could not chronicled outbursts that I'd allegedly had. Um, some going back to the time I couldn't remember, the time I threw a tantrum in a department store when I was a 5-year-old, my fight with another kid in a school, the school bully whom I didn't want to punch but did so at Mama's encouragement, the times I'd run from home to my grandparents' house because of Mom's discipline, quote unquote. Clearly, this woman had developed an impression of me solely on what Mom had told her. Yeah, that's what all therapists do. They think the parents are always right. Oh gosh, why are you here? Why are you, whatever. Whatever. Only God can judge. Uh, if I didn't have an anger problem before, I did now. Do you have any idea what you're talking about? I asked. At 14, I knew I was a little. Where was I? I was a. I knew at least a little about professional ethics. Aren't you supposed to. Okay. Aren't you supposed to ask me what I think about things and just not criticize me? I launched into an hour-long summary of my life to that point. I didn't tell the. Where am I? I done lost. I didn't tell the whole story since I knew I had to choose my words carefully. During Mom's domestic violence case, and a couple of years earlier, Lindsay and I let slip some unsavory details about Mom's parenting because it counted as a new revelation of abuse. The family counselor was required to report it to child services. So I didn't miss the irony. I didn't miss the irony of lying to a therapist to protect Mom, lest I ignite another intervention by the county child services. I explained the situation well enough after an hour. She said simply, "Perhaps we should meet alone." I saw this woman as an obstacle to overcome. Uh, and an obstacle placed by Mom, not as someone who might help. I explained only half of my feelings, that I had no interest in putting a 45-minute barrier between me and everyone I had ever depended on so I could replant myself. That's what Vice President Vance is just saying in this book. Between me and everyone I had ever depended on so I could replant myself with a man I knew would be sent packing. The therapist obviously understood. What I didn't tell her is that for the first time in my life I felt trapped. There was no papa and mama. Whoops. Of the United States. Under the administration of President Trump. Alright. Alright now. I don't know why you need to be sarcastic or whatever. No, that's not sarcastic. Well, then again, I'm like that as well. Where was I? Uh-oh. Oh, yeah. There was no papa and mama, a long-time smoker with the emphysema to prove it, seemed too frail and exhausted to care for a 14-year-old boy. My aunt and uncle had 2 young kids. Lindsay was newly married and had children of her own. No. I don't like how stupid I am. And I had nowhere to go. Is that what I said? Yeah, I had nowhere to go. I'd seen chaos and fighting, violence, drugs, and a great deal of instability, but I'd never felt like I had no way out. When the therapist asked me what I'd do, I replied that I would probably go live with my dad. She said that this sounded like a good idea. When I walked out of her office, I thanked her for her time and knew I'd never see her again. Mom had a massively blind spot in the way that she perceived the world. I don't know. That she would ask me to move with her to Dayton, that she seemed genuinely surprised by my resistance, and that she would subject me to such a one-sided introduction to a therapist meant that Mom didn't understand something about the way that Lindsay and I ticked. Lindsay once told me, Mom just doesn't get it. I initially disagreed with her. Of course she gets it. It's just the way she is. Something she can't change. Hang on. Okay, no, never mind. That's just the way it is. Chat box is small. Where am I initially disagreed with her. Of course she gets it. It's just the way she is. Something she can't change. After the incident with the therapist, I knew that Lindsay was right. Mama was unhappy when I told her that I planned to live with Dad, and so was everyone else. The way she is, I meant. That's what I meant to say. Where was I? No one really understood it. and I felt unable to say much about it. I knew that if I told the truth, I'd have a few people offering their spare bedrooms, and all of them would submit to Mama's demand that I live permanently with her. I also knew that living with Mama. What are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. Where am I? All the and all of them would submit to Mama's demand. Yeah. I also knew that living with Mama came with a lot of guilt. We don't need. We don't. This has nothing to do with it. This is real life, not some made-up fantasy game. All right. I don't know what. I don't know what you're talking about. Where am I? I keep losing my spot because you keep asking questions. Uh, where am I? I also knew that living with Mama came with a lot of guilt and a lot of questions about why I didn't live with my mom or dad, and a lot of whispers from a lot of people to Mama that she just needed to take a break and enjoy her golden years. Okay, smartass. Um, that feeling of being burdened to Mama wasn't something I managed. It came from a number of small cues, from the things she muttered under her breath, from the wariness she wore like a dark piece of clothing. I didn't want that, so I chose what seemed like the least bad option. uh, in some ways, I loved living with Dad. His life was normal in a different font, in precisely the way I'd always wanted mine to be. My stepmom worked part-time, but it was usually home. Dad came home from work around the same time each day. One of them, usually my stepmom, but sometimes Dad, made dinner every night, which we ate as a family. Before each meal, we'd say grace, something I'd always liked but never done outside of Kentucky. On weeknights, we'd watch some family sitcom together, and Dad and Cheryl never screamed at each other. Once I heard them raise their voices during an argument about money, but slightly elevated volumes were different from screaming. Were far different from screaming. On my first weekend at Dad's house, the first weekend I had ever spent with him, when I knew that. Come Monday, I wouldn't be going somewhere else. My younger brother invited a friend to sleep over. We fished in Dad's pond, fed horses, and grilled steaks for dinner. That night, we watched Indiana Jones movies until the early morning hours. Excuse me. There was no fighting, no adults hurling insults at one another, no glass china shattering um, angrily against the wall or floor. It was a boring evening, and it epitomized what attracted me to Dad's home. Dad's home. When I never lost though. What I never lost though was the sense of being on guard. When I moved in with my father, I'd known him for 2 years. I knew that he was a good man, a little quiet, a devout Christian from a very strict religious tradition. When we first reconnected, he made it clear that he didn't care for my taste in classic rock, especially Led Zeppelin. He wasn't mean about it, that wasn't his style, and he didn't tell me I couldn't listen to my favorite bands. He just advised me to listen to Christian rock instead. I could never tell my dad that I played a nerdly collectible card game called Magic because I feared he'd think the cards were satanic. After all, kids at the church youth group often spoke of magic and its evil influence on young Christians. And as most teenagers do, I had so many questions about my faith. Whether it was compatible with modern science, for instance, whether this or that denomination was correct on particular doctrinal disputes. I need my water. I'll be right back. I doubt he would have gotten upset if I'd asked those questions, but I never did because I didn't know how he'd respond. I didn't know whether he'd tell me I was the spawn of Satan and send me away. I didn't know how much of our new relationship was built on his sense that I was a good kid. I didn't know how he'd react if I listened to those Zeppelin CDs in his house with my younger siblings around. That knowing nod at me. That not knowing nod at me to the point where I could no longer take it. I think Mama understood what was going on in my head, even though I never told her explicitly. We spoke on the phone frequently, and one night she told me that I had to know she loved me more than anything, and she wanted me to return home when I was ready. This is your home, JD, and always will be. The next day, I called Lindsay and asked her to come and get me. Alright. Where am I? Oh yeah, she had a job, a house, a husband, and a baby. But she said, I'll be there in 45 minutes. I apologized to Dad, who was heartbroken by my decision, but he understood. You can't stay away from that crazy grandma of yours. I know she's good to you. It was a stunning admission from a man whom... where am I? It was a stunning admission from a man to whom Mama never said a nice word to... never said a nice word. Can't read this right. And it was the first indication that Dad understood the complex and conflicting feelings I'd developed. That meant a great deal to me. When Lindsay and her family came to get me, I got in the car, sighed, and said to her, "Thanks for taking me home." I gave my infant nephew a kiss on the forehead and said nothing else until we got to Mama's. I spent the rest of the summer mostly with Mama. A few weeks with Dad had given me no epiphanies. I still felt caught between a desire to stay with her, and a fear that my presence was depriving her of the comforts of old age. So before my freshman year started, I told Mom that I'd live with her so long as I could stay in Middletown schools and see Mama whenever I wanted. She said something about needing to transfer to a Dayton school after my freshman year, but I figured we'd cross that bridge in a year when we had to. Living with Mom and Matt was like having a, a front row seat at to the end of the world. Um, the fighting was relatively normal by my standards and Mom's, but I'm sure poor Matt kept asking himself how and when he'd hoped to express he he'd hopped the express he hopped the express train to Crazy Town. It was just the three of us in that house, and it was clear to all that it wouldn't work out. It was only a matter of time. Matt was a nice guy, and Lindsay and I joked nice guys never survived their encounters with our family. Um, Given the state of Mom and Matt's relationship, I was surprised when I came home from school one day early during my sophomore year, and Mom announced that she was getting married. Oh no. Is this Ken? Perhaps I thought, things weren't quite as bad as I expected. I honestly thought you and Matt were going to break up, I said. You fight every day. Well, she replied, I'm not getting married to him. It was a story that even I found incredible. Mom had been working as a nurse at our local dialysis center, a job she'd held for a few months. Her boss, about 10 years her senior, asked her out to dinner one night. She obliged, and with her relationship in shambles, she agreed to marry him a week later. She told me on a Thursday. On Saturday, we moved into Ken's house. His home was my fourth in 2 years. Ken was born in Korea, but raised by an American veteran and his wife. During that first week in his house, I decided to inspect his small greenhouse and stumbled upon a relatively mature marijuana plant. I told Mom. Whatever. Um, I told Mom, who told Ken, and by the end of the day, it had been replaced with a tomato plant. When I confronted Ken, he stammered, he stammered a bit and finally said, "It's for medicinal." Uh, okay, fine. Google Translate, here I come. Really?
Medicinal.
Medicinal. There. Happy now? Where am I? It's for medicinal purposes. Don't worry about it. Yeah, I'm not sure if medical marijuana. Wait, I think marijuana is now legal in Ohio. Ken's three children, a young girl and two boys about the same age I was, found the new arrangement as strange as I did. The oldest boy fought constantly with Mom, which, thanks to the Appalachian Honor Code, meant that he fought constantly with me. Shortly before I went to bed one night, I came downstairs just as he called her a bitch. No self-respecting hillbilly could stand idly by. So, I made it, abundantly clear that I meant to beat my new stepbrother to within an inch of his life. So unquenchable was my appetite for violence that night that Mom and Ken decided that my new stepbrother and I should be separated. Yeah, speaking of therapy, I think you desperately need it. Only God can judge. Sorry. Where am I? I wasn't even particularly angry. My desire to fight arose more out of a sense of duty. But it was a strong sense of duty, so Mom and I went to Mama's for the night. I remember watching an episode of The West Wing about education in America, a show that Dad watched constantly when I was younger. I don't remember when it was. He doesn't like politics, but yet he likes fake politics, which the majority of people rightfully believe is the key to opportunity. In it, the fictional president debates whether he should push school vouchers, giving public money to school children so that they escape failing public schools, or instead focus exclusively on fixing those same failing schools. That debate is important, of course. For a long time, which of my failing school district qualified for vouchers. But it was striking in an entire discussion about why poor kids struggled in school. The emphasis rested entirely on public institutions, as a teacher at my old high school told me recently. They want us to be shepherds to these kids, but no one wants to talk about the fact that many of them are raised by wolves. I don't know what happened the day after Mom and I escaped Ken's to Mama's for the night. Maybe I had a test that I wasn't able to study for. Maybe I had a homework assignment due that I never had the time to complete. What I do know Lord, you ought to know better than that. You know better. Don't insult the Lord thy God. You know better than that. And only God can judge. Where am I? I done lost where I was. And what I do know is that you're judging. And like I've said already, only God can judge. What I do know is that I was a sophomore in high school, and I was miserable. The constant moving and fighting, the seemingly endless carousel of new people I had to meet, learn to love and then forget this, and not my subpar public school was the real barrier to opportunity. I didn't know it, but I was close to Google Translate, here I come once again. I spelling that right? Where is it? There it is.
Precipice.
Precipice. I was close to the precipice. I had nearly failed out of my freshman year of high school, earning a 2.1 GPA. I didn't do my homework, I didn't study, and my attendance was abysmal. Uh, some days I'd fake an illness, and others I'd refuse to go. When I did go, I did so only to avoid a repeat of the letters the school had sent home a few years earlier. The ones I said, the ones that said if I didn't go to school, the administration would be forced to refer my case to the county social services. Along with my abysmal school record came drug experimentation. Nothing hard, just what alcohol could get my hands on, and a stash of weed that Ken's son and I found. Finally, proof, I suppose, that I did know the difference between a tomato plant and marijuana. For the first time in my life, I felt detached from Lindsay. She'd been married well over a year and a toddler. There was something heroic about Lindsay's marriage. That after everything she'd witnessed, she'd end up with someone who treated her well and had a decent job. Lindsay seemed genuinely happy. She was a good mom who doted on her young son. She had a little house not far from Mama's and seemed to be finding her way. Though I felt happy for my sister, her new life heightened my sense of separation. For my entire existence, we had lived under the same roof, but now she lived in Middletown, and I lived with Ken about 20 miles away. While Lindsay built a life almost in opposition to the one she left behind, she would be a good mother. She would have a successful marriage, and the only one. I found myself mired in the things that both of us hated. While Lindsay and her new husband took trips to Florida and California, I was stuck in a stranger's house in Miamisburg, Ohio. I don't know about that. So, okay. Alright then. I didn't know why the stream popped up. It just did. Maybe God wanted X to test you. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. Maybe. Alright then. Chapter 9. Mama knew little of how this arrangement affected me. Partly by design, during a long Christmas break, just a couple of months after I'd move in with my new stepfather, I called her to complain, but when she answered, I could hear the voices of family in the background. My aunt, I thought, and cousin Gail, and perhaps some others. The background noise suggested holiday merriment, and I didn't have the heart to tell her what I had called to say. That I loathed living with these strangers, and that everything that had made my life to that point tolerable. The reprieve of her house, the company of my sister, had apparently vanished. Where am I? I asked her to tell everyone whose voice I heard in the background that I loved them, and then I hung up the phone and marched upstairs to watch TV. I had never felt so alone. Happily, I continued to attend Middletown's schools, which kept me in touch with my school friends and gave me an excuse to spend a few hours at Mama's. During active school sessions, I saw her a few times a week, and every time I did, she reminded me of the importance of doing well academically. She often remarked that if anyone in our family made it, it would be me. Foreshadowing. I didn't have the heart to tell her what was really happening. I was supposed to be a lawyer or a doctor or a businessman, not a high school dropout, but I was much closer to dropping out than I was anything else. What's so great about my shirt? It's just my house clothing. Where am I? She learned the truth when Mom came to me one morning demanding her a jar of clean urine. Yeah, here we go. I had stayed at Mama's the night before and was getting ready for school when Mom walked in. Frantic and out of breath, she had to submit a random urinal sees, I think that's how you say it, but let me just make sure of that. Urinalysis, maybe that's how it's said.
Urinalyses.
Urinalyses, alright then. From the nursing board in order to keep her license, and someone I had called that morning demanding a sample by the end of the day. Mama's piss was dirtied by a half a dozen prescription drugs, so I was the only candidate. Mom's demand came with a strong air of entitlement. She had no remorse, no sense that she was asking me to do something wrong. Nor was there any guilt over the fact that she had broken yet another promise to never use drugs. I refused. Sensing my resistance, Mom transitioned. She became apologetic and desperate. She cried and begged, "I promise I'll do better. I promise." I had heard it many times before. And I didn't believe it even a little. Lindsay once told me that, above all, Mom was a survivor. She survived her childhood. She survived the men who came and went. She survived successive brushes with the law. And now she was doing everything she could to survive an encounter with the nursing board. I exploded. I told Mom that if she wanted clean piss, she should stop fucking up her life and get it from her own bladder. Yep. Yeah, I don't know either. I told Mama that enabling Mom made it worse, and that if she had forgot her own foot, and if she had put her foot down 30 years earlier, that maybe Mom wouldn't be she wouldn't be begging her own son for clean piss. Can't you see? Oh gosh. It's angled lower, that's why. Alright. Where am I? I told Mom that she was a shitty mother, and I told Mama she was a shitty mother too. The color drained from Mama's face, and she refused to even look at me in the eye. Yes, what I had said had clearly struck a nerve. Though I meant these, though I meant these things, I also knew that my urine might not be clean. Mom collapsed onto the couch, crying quietly, but uh, but but Mama wouldn't give in so easily. Even though I'd wounded her with my criticism, I pulled Mama. Quit, Dad! Gosh. Where am I? I done lost. I done lost where I was. I pulled Mama into the bathroom and whispered a confession that I had smoked kid's pot twice in the past few weeks. I can't give it to her. If Mom takes my pee, we both could be in trouble. We could both be in trouble. Yeah, we didn't really hear about this in the, movie. First, Mama, associated my fears. A couple of hits of pot, over 3 weeks wouldn't show up on the screen, she told me. Besides, you probably, didn't know what the hell you were doing. You didn't inhale, even if you tried. Then she addressed, because he was blowing the whistle. He does that to, try and get Kaylee to come to him. Just in case. He bought a whistle yesterday. Where am I? Then she addressed the morality of it. I know this isn't right, honey, but she's your mother, and she's my daughter. And maybe, if we help her this time, she'll finally learn her lesson. It was the eternal hope, the thing to which I couldn't say no. That drove me to voluntarily attend those many NA meetings, as in narcotics and narcotics anonymous. You know. Where am I? Consume books on addiction, and anticipate in Mom's treatment to the fullest. Why are you questioning me about my life? Is this your business? Alright, where am I? I can't even find where I am, but... consume books on addiction and participate in Mom's treatment to the fullest extent that I could. It had driven me to get in the car with her when I was 12, knowing that her emotional state could lead her to do something she'd regret later. Mama never lost that hope. After more heartache and disappointment that I could possibly fathom, her life was a clinic in how Alright. Seriously. You are 2 seconds away from being timed out, alright? You're distracting me. You're not helping anything, okay? I don't like how he does that in the house when I'm trying to read this, alright? Lord, I don't know what's going on, alright? Where am I? Alright, I'm burning up. I'm burning up now. Where's the fan remotes? There's that one. Alright. participate in Mom's treatment to the fullest extent that I could. It had driven me to get in the car with her when I was 12, knowing that her emotional state could lead her to do something she'd regret later. Mama never lost hope after more heartache and disappointment than I could possibly fathom. Her life was a clinic in how to lose faith in people, but Mama always found a way to believe in the people she loved. So I don't regret relenting. Giving Mom that piss was wrong, but I'll never regret following Mama's lead. Her hope allowed her to forgive Papa after the rough years of their marriage, and it convinced her to take me in when I needed her most. Listen, God is still in control of all this. Alright, I know He's not here, but He's still in control of me. I don't know why. Is that like a middle page or something? Though I followed Mama's lead, something inside me broke that morning. I went to school red-eyed, crying and regretful that I'd helped. A few weeks earlier, I had sat with Mom at a Chinese buffet as she tried in vain to shovel food in her mouth. It's a memory that still makes my blood boil. Mom unable to open her eyes and close her mouth, spooning food in as it fell back on the plate. Other people stared at us. Ken was speechless, and Mom was oblivious. It was a prescription pain pill of many of them that had done this to her. I hated her for it and promised myself that if she ever was on drugs again, I'd leave the house. The urine episode was the last straw for Mama too. When I came home from school, Mama told me that she wanted me to stay with her permanently, with no more moving in between. Okay, Mom seemed not to care. She needed a break. She said I supposed from being a mother. She said I supposed from being a mother. She and Ken didn't last much longer, but by the end of sophomore year, she had moved out of his house, and I moved in with Mama, never to return to the homes of Mom and her men. At least she passed her piss test. Really? She did? Alright. I didn't even have to pack, because much of what I owned remained at Mama's as I bounced from place to place. She didn't approve of me taking too many of my belongings to Ken's house, convinced that he and his kids might steal my socks and shirts. Neither Ken nor his children ever stole from me. Though I loved living with her, my new home tested my patience on many levels. I still harbored the insecurity that I was burdening her. More important, she was a hard woman to live with. Quick-witted and sharp-tongued. If I didn't take out the garbage, she told me to stop being a lazy piece of shit. When I forgot to do my homework, she called me shit for brains. I'm sorry now, okay? This is, I'm just reading what the book says, alright? And reminded me that unless I studied, I'd amount to nothing. She demanded that I play card games with her, usually grin rummy. She never lost. You are the worst fucking card player I've ever met, she'd quote. I'm sorry, this is just what she's saying. That one never make me feel. That one didn't make me feel bad. She said it to everyone she beat, and she beat everyone at gin rummy. Is that how it's said? Years later, every single one of my relatives, Aunt Wee, Uncle Jimmy, even Lindsay, repeated some version of Mama was really hard on you. Too hard. These were rules in her house. Get good grades, get a job, and get off your ass and help me. There was no set chore list. I just sat and had to help her with whatever she was doing. And she never told me what to do. She just yelled at me if I did anything and I wasn't helping. But we had a lot of fun. Mama took a bigger bark than bite. At least with me. She once ordered me to watch a TV show with her on Friday night. A creepy murder mystery. The type of show Mama loved to watch. At the climax of the show, during a moment designed to make the viewer jump, Mama flipped the lights and screamed in my ear. She'd seen the episode before and knew what was coming. She made me sit there for 45 minutes just so she could scare me at the appointed time. Oh gosh. The best part about living with Mama was that I began to understand what made her tick. Until then, I had resented how rarely we traveled to Kentucky after Mama Blanton's death. The decline in visits wasn't noticeable at first. But by the time I started middle school, we visited Kentucky only a few times a year, for a few days at a time. Living with Mama, I learned that she and her sister Rose, a woman of uncommon kindness, had a falling out after their mother died. Mama had hoped that the old house would become a sort of family timeshare, while Rose had hoped that the house would go to her son and his family. Rose had a point. None of the siblings who lived in Ohio or Indiana visited often enough. So it made sense to give the house to someone who would use it. But Mama feared that without a home base, her children and grandchildren would have no place to stay during their visits to Jackson. She, too, had a point. I started to understand that Mama saw returning to Jackson as a duty to endure, rather than a source of enjoyment. To me, Jackson was about my uncles and chasing turtles and finding peace from instability that plagued my Ohio existence. Jackson gave me a shared home with Mama, a 3-hour road trip to tell me and listen to stories, and a place. Gosh, my hands are messing up. They're hurting. Where am I? Hey, don't turn the page on me, you stupid fan. Alright. Jackson gave me a shared home with Mama, a 3-hour road trip to tell and listen to stories, and a place where everyone knew me as a grandson of the famous Jim and Bonnie Vance. Jackson was something much different to her. It was the place where she sometimes went hungry as a child, from which she ran in the wake of a teenage pregnancy scandal, and where so many of her friends had given their lives in the mines. I wanted to escape to Jackson. No, don't turn the page, you stupid fan. Alright. And yeah. I wanted to escape to Jackson. She had escaped from it. In her old age, with limited mobility, Mama loved to watch TV. She preferred raunchy humor and epic dramas, so she had a lot of options. But her favorite show was by far an HBO mob story, The Sopranos. Looking back, it was hardly surprising that a show about a fiercely loyal what was that? I saw something. Whatever. Sometimes violent outsiders resonated with Mama. Changed the names and dates, and the Italian mafia started to look like a Hatfield-McCoy dispute back in the Appalachia. The show's main character, Tony Soprano, was a violent killer, an objectively terrible person by almost any standard. But Mama respected his loyalty. An objectively terrible person by almost any standard, but Mama respected his loyalty and the fact that he would go to any length to protect the honor of his family, though he murdered countless enemies. I'm seeing things. Though he murdered countless enemies. Where am I? And drank excessively. The only criticism she ever levied against him involved his infidelity. He's always sleeping around. I don't like that. I also saw for the first time Mama's love of children, not as an object of her affection, but as an observer of it. She often babysat for Lindsay's and Aunt Wee's young kids. One day she had... Alright, that's it. I gotta turn off the, keep the fan from turning. I don't remember what you call it. 'Cause I can't have it turning me to page 136 every time. Where was I? I can't remember. One day she had both of Aunt Wee's girls for the day. And Aunt Wee's dog in the backyard. When the dog barked, Mama screamed, "Shut up, you son of a bitch!" My cousin, Bonnie Rose, ran to the back door and began screaming and over, "Son of a bitch, son of a bitch!" Mama hobbled over to Bonnie Rose and scooped her up to the arms. "Shh, you can't say that or you'll get me in trouble." But she was laughing so hard she could barely get the words out. A few weeks later, I got home from school and asked Mama how her day had gone. She told me that she'd had a great day because she'd been watching Lindsay's son Cameron. He'd asked me if he could say fuck like I do. I told him yes, but only at my house. Then she chuckled quietly to herself. Oh gosh. Regardless of how she felt, whether her emphysema made it difficult to breathe, or her hip hurt so badly that she could barely walk, she never turned down an opportunity to spend time with those babies. As she put it, That's just what she said. Um, Mama loved them, and I began to understand why she had always dreamed of becoming a lawyer for abused and neglected children. At some point, Mama underwent major back surgery to help the pain that made walking difficult. She landed in a nursing home for a few months to recover, forcing me to live alone, an experience that happily didn't last long. Every night she called Lindsay, Aunt Wee, or me to and made the same request. I hate the damned food here. Can you go to Taco Bell and get me a bean burrito? Indeed, Mama hated everything about the nursing home, and once asked me to promise that if she ever faced a permanent stay, that I'd take her 44 Magnum and put a bullet in her head. Mama, you can't ask me to do that. I go to jail for the rest of my life. Well, she said, pausing for a moment to reflect, then get your hands on some arsenic. That way no one will know. Her back surgery, it turned out, was completely unnecessary. She had a broken hip, and as soon as a surgeon repaired it, she was back on her feet, though she used a walker or a cane from then on. Now that I'm a lawyer, I marvel that we never considered a medical malpractice suit against the doctor who operated unnecessarily on her back. But Mama wouldn't have allowed it. She didn't believe in using the legal system until you had to. Sometimes I'd see Mom every few days, and sometimes I'd go a couple of weeks without hearing from her at all. After one breakup, she spent a few months on Mama's couch, and we both enjoyed her company. Mom tried, in her own way, when she was working. She'd always give her money on paydays. Almost certainly more than she could afford, for reasons I never quite understood. Mom equated money with affection. Perhaps she felt that I would never appreciate that she loved me unless she offered a wad of spending money, but I never cared about the money. I just wanted her to be healthy. Not even my closest friends knew that I lived in my grandma's house. I recognized that though many of my peers lacked the traditional, American family. Mine was more non-traditional than the most, and we were poor. A status Mama wore like a badge of honor, but I'd hardly come to grips with. I didn't wear clothes from my Abercrombie and Fitch or American Eagle unless I'd received them for Christmas. When Mama picked me up from school, I'd ask her not to get out of the car, lest my friends see her, wearing a uniform of baggy clothes and a men's t-shirt, with a giant menthol cigarette hanging from her lip. When people asked, I lied and told them I lived with my mom, that she and I took care of my ailing grandmother. Even today, I still regret that far too many high school friends and acquaintances never knew Mama was the best thing that ever happened to me. My junior year, I tested into the honors advanced math class, a hybrid of trigonometry, advanced algebra, and pre-calculus. The class's instructor, Ron Selby, enjoyed legendary status among the students for his brilliance, and high demands in 20 years. He had never missed a day of school, according to Middletown High School legend. A student called into a bomb threat during one of Selby's exams, hiding the explosive device in a bag in his locker. With the entire school evacuated outside, Selby marched into the school, retrieved the contents of the kid's locker, marched outside, and threw the contents in the trash can. I've had that kid in class. He's not smart enough to make a functioning bomb, Selby told the police officers gathered at the school. Now let my students go back to class and finish their exams. Mama loved stories like this, and though she never met Selby, she admired him and encouraged me to follow his lead. Selby encouraged, but didn't require, his students to obtain advanced graphing calculators. The Texas Instruments Model 89 was the latest and greatest. We didn't have cell phones, and we didn't have nice clothes. But Mama made sure that I had one of those graphing calculators. This taught me an important lesson about Mama's values, and it forced me to engage with school in a way I never had before. If Mama could drop $180 on a graphing calculator, she insisted that I spend none of my own money. Then I had better take schoolwork more seriously. I owed it to her, and she reminded me of it constantly. Have you finished your work for that Selby teacher? No, Mama, not yet. You damn well better start. I didn't spend every penny I had on that little computer so you could fuck around all day. Gosh. Yeah, we know from his speech at the RNC that that she loved the Lord, but also loved to use the F word. Those 3 years with Mama, uninterrupted and alone, saved me. I didn't notice the casualty of the change, how living with her turned my life around. I didn't notice that my grades began to improve immediately after I moved in, and I couldn't have known that I was making lifelong friends. During that time, Mama and I started to talk about the problems in our community. Mama encouraged me to get a job. She told me that it would be good for me, and that I needed to learn the value of a dollar. With her encouragement fell on deaf ears. She then demanded that I get a job, so I did. As a cashier at Dillman's, a local grocery store. Working as a cashier turned me into an amateur sociologist. A frenetic, stress-animated, so many of our customers. One of our neighbors would walk in and yell at me for the smallest of our transgressions, not smiling at her or bagging the groceries too one day or too light the next. Or bagging the groceries too heavy one day or too light the next. Sorry. Okay. Some came into the store in a hurry, pacing between aisles, looking frantically for a particular item, but others waded through the aisles deliberately, carefully marking each item off their list. Some folks purchased a lot of canned and frozen food, while others consistently arrived at the checkout counter with carts piled high with fresh produce. The more harried a customer, the more they purchased pre-cooked or frozen food, the more likely they were they were to be poor. Um, and I knew they were poor because of the clothes they wore, or because they purchased their food with food stamps. After a few months, I came home and asked Mama why only poor people bought baby formula. Don't rich people have babies too? Mama had no answers, and it would be many years before I learned that rich folks are considerably more likely to breastfeed their children. What? As my job taught me a little more about America's class divide, it also imbued me with a bit of resentment directed toward the wealthy and my own kind. The owners of Dillman's were old-fashioned, so they allowed me with good credit to run grocery tabs, some of which surpassed $1,000. I knew that if any of my relatives walked in and ran up a bill of over $1,000, they'd be asked to pay immediately. I hated the feeling that my boss counted my people as less trustworthy than those who took their groceries home in a Cadillac. But I got over it one day. One day I told myself, I'll have my own damned tab. I also learned how people gamed the welfare system. They'd buy 24 packs of soda with food stamps, then sell them at a discount for cash. They'd ring up their orders separately, buying food with food stamps, and beer, wine, and cigarettes with cash. They'd regularly go through the checkout line, speaking on their cell phones. I could never understand why our lives felt like a struggle, while those living off of government largesse, I think that's how you say it.
Largesse.
Largesse. Largesse, that's how you say it. Living off of government largesse, enjoyed trinkets that I only dreamed about. Mama listened intently to my experience at Dillman's. We began to view much of our fellow working class with mistrust. Most of us were struggling to get by, but we made do, worked hard, and hoped for a better life. But a large minority was content to live off of the dole. Every 2 weeks, I'd get a small paycheck and notice the line where federal and state income taxes were deducted from my wages. At least as often, our drug addict neighbor would buy T-bone steaks, which I was too poor to buy for myself and was forced by Uncle Sam to buy for someone else. This was my mindset when I was 17, and though I'm far less angry today than I was then, where am I? It was my first indication that the policies of Mama's Party of the Working Man, the Democrats, weren't all they were cracked up to be. I'm gonna look ahead to see how long I have in this chapter. Oh my gosh, I got like 11 more pages to read. political scientists have spent millions of words trying to explain how Appalachia in the South went from staunchly Democratic to staunchly Democratic to staunchly Republican in less than a generation. Some of the blame race relations and the Democratic Party's embrace of the civil rights movement. Um, Others cite religious faith and the hold that conservatism has on evangelicals in that region. A big part of the explanation lies in the fact that many of the white working class saw precisely what I did, working at Dillman's as far as far back as the 1970s. The white working class began to turn to Richard Nixon because they were a perception because of a perception that, as one man put it, government was paying people who are on welfare today doing nothing. They're laughing at our society and are all hard working people. And we're getting laughed at for working every day. Citation 20. First citation I've seen in a while. At around that time, our neighbor, one of Mama and Papa's oldest friends, registered the house next to ours for Section 8. Section 8 is a government program that offers low-income residents a voucher of rent housing. Mama's friend had a little luck renting his property, but when he qualified his house for the Section 8 voucher, he virtually assured that would change. Mama saw it as a betrayal, ensuring that bad people would move into the neighborhood and drive down property values. Despite our efforts to draw bright lines between the working and non-working poor, Mama and I recognized that we shared a lot in common with those whom we thought gave our people a bad name. Those Section 8 recipients looked a lot like us. The matriarch of the first family to move in next door was born in Kentucky and moved north at a young age as their parents sought a better life. She'd gotten involved with a couple of men, each of whom had left her with a child but no support. She was nice, but so were her kids. But the drugs and late night fighting revealed troubles that too many hillbilly transplants knew too well. Confronted with such a realization of her own family's struggle, Mama grew frustrated and angry. From that anger sprang Bonnie Vance, the social policy expert. She's a lazy whore, but wouldn't be if she was forced to get a job. I hate those fuckers for giving these people the money to move into our neighborhood. She'd rant against the people we'd see in the grocery store. I can't understand why people who've worked all their lives scrape by while these deadbeats buy liquor and cell phone coverage with our tax money. These were bizarre views for my bleeding heart grandma. And if she blasted the government for doing too much one day, she'd blast it for doing too little the next. The government, after all, was just helping poor people find a place to live. And my grandma loved the idea of anyone helping the poor. She had no uh, philosophical ob- objection to Section 8 vouchers, so the Democrat in her would resurface. She'd rant about the lack of jobs and wonder aloud whether that was why our neighbor couldn't find a good man. In her more, where is it? I don't know. She'd rant about the lack of jobs and wonder aloud, whether she, whether that was why our neighbor couldn't find a good man. In her compassionate moments, Mama asked if it made any sense that our society could afford aircraft carriers but not drug treatment facilities. Like moms, for everyone, sometimes she'd criticize the faceless rich, whom she saw as far too unwilling to carry their fair share of social burden. Mama saw every ballot failure of the school improvement tax, and there were many, and the indictment of our society's failure to provide a quality education to kids like me. Mama's sentiments occupied wildly different parts of the political spectrum. Depending on her mood, Mama was a radical conservative or a European social democrat. Because of this, I initially assumed that Mama was an unreformed simpleton, and that was as soon as she opened her mouth about policy or politics, I might as well close my ears. Yet I quickly realized that in Mama's contradictions lay great wisdom. I had spent so long just surviving my world, but now that I had a little space to observe it, I began to see the world as Mama did. I was scared, confused, angry, and heartbroken. I'd blame large businesses for closing up shop and moving overseas, and then I'd wonder if I might have the same thing. I'd curse our government for not helping enough, and then I'd wonder if, in its attempts to help, it actually made the problem worse. Mama could spew venom like a Marine Corps drill instructor, but what she saw in our community didn't just piss her off, it broke her heart. Behind the drugs and the fighting matches and the financial struggles, these were people with serious problems, and they were hurting. Our neighbors had a kind of desperate sadness in their lives. You'd see it in how the mother would grin but never really smile, or in the jokes that the teenage girl told about her mother smacking the shit out of her. I knew what awkward humor like this meant to conceal I'd used I'd use it in the past. Grin and bear it, said the adag, says the adag, and I'm reading that wrong. I don't care about it. If anyone appreciated this, Mama did. The problems in our community hit close to home. Mom's struggles weren't some isolated incident. They were replicated, replayed, and relived by many of the people who, like us, had moved hundreds of miles in search of a better life. There was no end in sight. Mama had thought she escaped the poverty of the hills, but the poverty, emotional, if not financial, had followed her. Something had made her later years eerily similar to her earliest ones. What was happening? What was happening? What were our neighbor's teenage daughter's prospects? Um, Certainly the odds were against her, with a life like that. This raised the question, what would happen to me? I was unable to answer these questions in a way that didn't implicate something deep within the place I called home. What I knew is that other people didn't live like we did. When I visited Uncle Jimmy, I did not wake to the screams of neighbors. In Aunt Wee and Dan's neighborhood, homes were beautiful and lawns well manicured, and police came around to smile and wave, but never to load someone's mom or dad in the back of their cruiser. So I wondered what was different about us. Not just me and my family, but our uh, neighborhood and town, and everyone from Jackson to Middletown and beyond. When Mom was arrested a couple of years earlier, the neighbors' porches and front yards filled with spectators. There was no embarrassment like waving to the neighbors right after the cops have carted your mother off. Mom's exploits were undoubtedly extreme, but all of us had seen the show before with different neighbors. These sorts of things had their own rhythm. A mild screaming match might invite a few cracked shutters or peeking eyes between the shades. If things escalated a bit, bedrooms would illuminate as people awoke to investigate the commotion. And if things got out of hand, the police would come and take someone's drunk dad or unhinged mom down to the city building. Sorry. That building housed the tax collector, the public utilities, and even a small museum. But all the kids in my neighborhood knew it was the home of Middletown's short-term jail. I consumed books about social policy and the working poor. Excuse me. One book in particular, the study of eminent sociologist William Julius Wilson, called The Truly Disadvantaged, struck a nerve. I was 16 the first time I read it. And though I didn't fully understand it at all, I grasped the core thesis. As millions migrated north to factory jobs, the communities that sprouted up around those factories were vibrant but fragile. When the factories shut their doors, the people left behind were trapped in towns and cities that could no longer support such large populations with high quality work. Those who could, generally the well-educated, wealthy, or well-connected, left, leaving behind communities or of poor people. These remaining folks were the truly disadvantaged, unable to find good jobs of their own, surrounded by communities that offered little in the way of connections or social support. Wilson's book spoke to me. I wanted to write him a letter and tell him that he had described my home perfectly, that it resonated so personally as is odd. However, because he wasn't writing about the hillbilly transplants from Appalachia, he was He was true of Charles Murray's seminal, uh, my stomach's hurting. I don't know why. Seminal, Losing Ground. Another book, about black folks that could have been written about hillbillies, which addressed the way our government encouraged social decay through the welfare state. Though insightful, neither of these books fully answered the questions that plagued me. Why didn't our neighbor leave that abusive man? Why did she spend her money on drugs? Why couldn't she see that her behavior was destroying her daughter? Why were all of these things happening not just to our neighbor, but to my mom? But it would be years before I learned that no single book or expert or field could fully explain the problems of hillbillies in modern America. Or Elegy is a sociological one. Yes, but it is also about sociology, um, and community and culture and faith. During my junior year of high school, our neighbor Patty called her landlord to report a leaky roof. The landlord arrived and found Patty topless, stoned, and unconscious on her living room couch. Upstairs, the bathtub was overflowing, hence the leaking roof. Patty had apparently drawn herself a bath, taken a few prescription painkillers, and passed out. The top floor of her home and many of her family possessions were ruined. This is the reality of our community. It's about a naked druggie destroying what little of value exists in her life. It's about children who lose their toys and clothes to a mother's addiction. Another neighbor lived alone in the big pink house. She was a recluse. She was a recluse, a neighborhood mystery. She came outside only to smoke. She never said hello, and her lights were always off. She and her husband had divorced, and her children had landed in jail. She was extremely obese as a child. I used to wonder if she hated the outdoors because she was too heavy to move. There were the neighbors down the street, a younger woman with a toddler and her middle-aged boyfriend. The boyfriend worked, and the woman spent her days watching The Young and the Restless. Her young son was adorable, and he loved Mama. And at all times of the day, one time past midnight, he would wander to her doorstep and ask for a snack. His mother had all the time in the world, but she couldn't keep a close enough watch on her child to prevent him from staying into the homes of strangers. Sometimes his diaper would need changing. Mama once called social services on the woman, hoping they'd somehow rescue the young boy. They did nothing. So Mama used my nephew's diapers and kept a watchful eye on the neighborhood, always looking for signs of her little buddy. My sister's friend lived in a small duplex. What am I talking about? With her mother, a welfare queen, if one ever existed. She had 7 siblings, most of them from the same father, which was, unfortunately, a rarity. Her mother had never held a job and seemed interested only in breeding. as Mama put it. Oh gosh. Uh, Her kids never had a chance. One ended up in an abusive relationship that produced a child before the mom was old enough to purchase cigarettes. The oldest one overdosed on drugs and was arrested not long after he graduated from high school. This was my world, a world of truly irrational behavior. We spent our way into the poorhouse. We buy giant TVs and iPads. Children wear nice clothes thanks to high interest credit cards and payday loans. We purchase homes we don't need. Uh, refinance them for spending money and declare bankruptcy, often leaving them full of garbage in our wake. Thrift was a uh, thrift is inimical 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 is inimical to our being. I don't know how to exactly say it. Where was I? We spend to pretend that we're upper class, and when the dust clears, when bankruptcy hits, or a family member of our stupidity, bails us out of our stupidity, there's nothing left over. Nothing for the kids' college tuition, no investment to grow our wealth, no rainy day fund if someone loses her job. Hang on. I don't know how to exactly lay this out. No rainy day fund if someone loses her job. We know we shouldn't spend like this. Sometimes we beat ourselves up over it, but we do it anyway. Our homes are a chaotic mess. We scream and yell at each other like we're spectators at a football game. At least one member of the family uses drugs, sometimes the father. Sometimes the mother, sometimes both. At especially stressful times, we'll hit and punch each other, all in front of the rest of the family, including young children. Much of the time, the neighbors hear what's happening. A bad day is when the neighbors call the police to stop the drama. Our kids go to foster care but never stay for long. We apologize to our kids. The kids believe we're really sorry, and we are. But then we act just as mean a few days later. We don't study as children, and we don't make our kids study when we're parents. Our kids perform poorly in school. We might get angry with them, but we never give them the tools like peace and quiet at home to succeed. Even when the best and brightest will likely go to college close to home, even if they survive the war zone in their own home. I don't care if you got into Notre Dame. We say, you can get a fine, cheap education at the community college. The irony is that poor people like us, and education at Notre Dame is both cheaper and finer. We choose not to work when we should be looking for jobs. Sometimes we'll get a job, but it won't last. We'll get fired for tardiness, or for stealing merchandise and selling it on eBay, or having a customer complain about the smell of alcohol on our breath, for taking taking five 30-minute restroom breaks per shift. We talk about the value of hard work, but tell ourselves that the reason we're not working is some perceived unfairness. Obama shut down the coal mines, or all the jobs went to the Chinese. These are the lies we tell ourselves to solve the cognitive dissonance. The broken connection between the world we see and the values we preach. We talk to our children about responsibility, but we never walk the walk. It's like this. For years I dream of owning a German Shepherd puppy. Somehow Mom found me one, but when he was our fourth dog, I had no clue how to train him. Within a few years, all of them had vanished, given to the police department or to a family friend. After saying goodbye to the fourth dog, our hearts harden. We learn not to grow attached. Our eating and exercise habits seem designed to send us to an early grave, and it's working. In certain parts of Kentucky, our local life expectancy is 67, a full decade and a half below what is in nearby Virginia. A recent study found that unique among all ethnic groups in the United States, the life expectancy of working-class white folks is going down. We eat Pillsbury cinnamon rolls for breakfast, Taco Bell for lunch, and McDonald's for dinner. We rarely cook, even though it's cheaper and better for the body and soul. Exercise is confined to the graves we play as children. We see people jog on the streets only if our homes for the military or college in some distant place. Not all of the white working class struggles. I knew even as a child that... Sorry, I'm getting hot. Hey, don't look up there. Where am I? Oh my gosh, I can't find where I am. I can't find where I am. We eat Pillsbury cinnamon rolls for breakfast. Okay, we rarely cook, even though it's cheaper and better for the body and soul. Exercise is confined to the games we play as children. We see people jog on the streets only if we leave our homes for the military or for college in some distant place. I can't find where I am. Not all of the white working class struggles. I knew even as a child that there were two separate sets of mores and social pressures. My grandparents embodied one type: old-fashioned, quietly faithful, self-reliant, hard-working. My mother and, increasingly, the entire neighborhood embodied another: consumerist, isolated, angry, distrustful. There were, and remain, many who live by my grandparents' code. Sometimes you saw it in the subtlest subtlest. Uh, I can't figure this out. Can you figure it out while I'm covering the microphone? I don't know. Good lord, I don't know what I'm doing. The old neighbor who diligently... I don't know how to get comfortable. I don't know. Okay? I wish I knew. I'm either hot or uncomfortable. I don't know what's going on. The old neighbor who diligently tended her garden, even as her neighbors let their homes rot from the inside out. Excuse me. The young woman who grew up with my mom, who returned to the neighborhood every day to help her mother navigate old age. I say this not to romanticize my grandparents' way of life, which, as I've observed, was rife with problems, but to note that many of our community may have struggled, but did so successfully. There are many intact families, many dinners shared in peaceful homes, many children studying hard and believing they'll claim their own American dream. Many of my friends have built successful lives and happy families in Middletown or nearby. They are not the problem, and if you believe the statistics, the children of these intact homes have plenty of reason for optimism. I've been reading for 2 hours now. You gotta understand. 2 hours is a long time. I always straddled those two worlds, thanks to Mama. I never saw only the worst of what our community offered, and I believe that saved me. There was always a safe place and a loving embrace if I ever needed it. Our neighbors' kids and couldn't say the same. One Sunday, Mama agreed to watch Aunt Wee's kids for several hours. Aunt Wee dropped them off at 10. I had to work a dreaded 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. shift at the grocery store. I hung out with the kids for about 45 minutes, then left at 10:45 for work. I wanted nothing more than to spend the day with Mama and the babies. I told Mama that, and instead of telling me to quit your damn whining, like I expected, she told me she wished that I could stay home too. It was a rare moment of empathy. But if you want the sort of work where you could spend the weekends with your family, you've got to go to college and make something of yourself. This was the essence of Mama's genius. She didn't just preach and cuss and demand. She showed me what was possible. A peaceful Sunday afternoon with the people I loved, and made sure I knew how to get there. Reams of social science attest to the positive effect of a loving and stable home. I could cite a dozen studies suggesting that Mama's home offered me not just a short-term haven, but also a hope for a better life. Entire volumes of devoted and to the phenomenon of resilient children. Can't tell which way's straight. Kids who prosper despite an unstable home because they have the social support of a loving adult. I know Mama was good for me, not because some Harvard sociologist says so, but because I felt it. Consider my life before I moved in with Mama. In the middle of third grade, we left Middletown and my grandparents to live in Preble County with Bob. And at the end of fourth grade, we left Preble County to live in a Middletown duplex on a 200 block on the 200 block of McKinley Street. To move on the 300 block of McKinley Street, and by that time, Chip was a regular in our home. Though he never lived with us, at the end of 6th grade, we remained on 300 block of McKinley Street, but Chip had been replaced by Steve, and there were many discussions about moving in with Steve. At the end of 7th grade, Matt had taken Steve's place. Mom was preparing to move in with Matt, and Mom hoped that I would join her in Dayton. And after a brief detour at my dad's house, I can't say that word. Let me go back to Google Translate. Where is it? Is it equaste or something? I lost the word. Where is it? Right by my thumb.
Acquiesced.
Acquiesced, okay. Very well. At the end of 9th grade, I moved in with Ken, a complete stranger, and his What? And his 3 kids. I can't even read this right. On top of all that were the drugs, the domestic violence case, children's services prying into our lives, and Papaw dying. Today, even remembering that period long enough to write it down invokes an intense, indescribable anxiety in me. Not long ago, I noticed that a Facebook friend, an acquaintance from high school with similarly deep hillbilly roots, was constantly changing boyfriends, going in and out of relationships, posting pictures of one guy one week and another 3 weeks later, fighting on social media with a new fling until the relationship publicly imploded. She is my age with 4 children, and when she posted that she had family found a man who would treat her well, a refrain I'd seen many times before. Her 13-year daughter commented, "Just stop. I want you and this to stop." I wish I could hug that little girl, because I know how she feels. For 7 long years, I just wanted it to stop. I didn't care so much about the fighting, the screaming, or even the drugs. I just wanted a home, and I wanted to stay there. And I wanted these goddamned strangers to stay the fuck out. Damn. Now consider the sum of my life after I moved in with Mama permanently. At the end of 10th grade, I lived with Mama in her house. with no one else. At the end of 11th grade, I lived with Mama in her house with no one else. At the end of 12th grade, I lived with Mama in her house with no one else. I could say that the peace of Mama's home gave me a safe space to do my homework. I could say that with the absence of fighting and instability, let me focus on school and my job. I could say that spending all of my time in the same house with the same person made it easier for me to form lasting friendships with people at school. I could say the same. I could say that having a job and learning a bit about the world helped me clarify precisely what I wanted out of my own life. In hindsight, those explanations make sense, and I am certain in a bit of truth lies in each. A bit of truth lies in each. I'm sure that the sociologists and psychologists sitting in a room together could explain why I lost interest in drugs, why my grades improved, why I aced the SAT, and why I found a couple of teachers who inspired me to love learning, and why I remember most of all is that I was happy. I no longer feared the school bell at the end of the day. I knew where I'd be living for the next month. I knew no one's romantic decisions affected my life. And out of that happiness came so many of the opportunities I've had for the past 12 years. And that was chapter 9. I'm not going to read chapter 10. I've been reading for 2 straight hours. 2 hours. And I was mentally drained. Alright, so thank y'all so much for watching. If y'all did enjoy, please hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Excuse me. Excuse me again. And I'll see y'all next time. God bless.